have a right to know the latest info in ASL. You can see we've changed this a little bit, the kind of the setup from earlier today. And again, as we continue to evolve, right? Lots of podiums, lost our maps. The whole thing was a little bit of a mess earlier, to be quite honest. And our victims in this investigation and the people that are doing the work deserve better than that. So I would also tell you that we're kind of looking for a larger venue as well. The chains here and everything else seems to work. We're going to use some technology for some pictures here right off the bat. So I would say that, again, thank you for joining us. It's been a busy day for our law enforcement officers and our partners around the state. I'm going to give some updates from what we found, but the real primary reason I wanted to bring you back in today was we wanted to really identify the victims and show their pictures. We won't get into family backgrounds and their lineage at all, but we do want to show those pictures, give ages. I would say that the families didn't want hometowns listed. They do certainly deserve and want some privacy around these issues, which makes complete sense. And we're going to start with that component of our information simply because that's why we're here, right? This is about the victims. That's why we do what we do, and that's why we're striving so hard, and that's why you're here, because you care about them as well. So we're going to go ahead and load that behind us here on the screen. And I think Shannon Moss can also put that information out following this. Some specifics here, I would just like to note that the families actually approved these photos, sent these photos in to us for a lot of different reasons. I think some of them show a little of their character, a little of their relationships, and some other specifics. You'll just see, again, a picture, a name, an age, and then there's a couple symbols there. And we wanted to be specific enough to what location they ultimately lost their lives at. And again, thank the families for allowing us to even do this. They certainly didn't need to do that. They're working through their own struggles, and rightfully so. So I'm going to start with this and then ask for just a moment of silence before we continue on to our next agenda item. But that top left, as you see it, and that is Ronald G. Morin, 55. And I won't read the venues. You can put that all together yourself. Peyton Brewer Ross, 40 years of age. Joshua A. Seal, 36 years of age. Brian M. McFarland, 41 years of age. Joseph Lawrence Walker, 57. Arthur Fred Strout, 42. Max A. Hathaway, 35. Stephen M. Vozella, 45. Thomas Ryan Conrad, 34. Michael R. Deloria, II, 51. Jason Adam Walker, 51. Tricia C. Asselin, 53. William A. Young, 44. Aaron Young, 14, his son. Robert E. Violette, 76, and his wife, Lucille M. Violette, 73. William Frank Brackett, 48 years of age. Keith D. McNair, 64. Just have a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you for that. Truly, truly appreciate it. And we do, again, appreciate that to the family. They did give us those photos. I did not, however, have any of the family members pronounce any of those last names, so certainly no disrespect intended if in any way screwed up the pronunciation. So to move on, I would also like to address the numbers of the victims that I confirmed earlier today with the number 8. And I will tell you that's miscommunication on my part. I was wrong. In talking to our detectives, we had a list for people that had been identified and family members that had been notified. There's also a separate list that involved family advocacy and whether or not they had been plugged into that. So the reality here is that all 18 of those victims, everybody that we listed here today, everybody has been identified and their families have been notified. So we were in contact with them. I would expect some more information later tonight, and I'll definitely talk about it tomorrow morning at 10, reference to Family Information Center, a new location, and some material around that, exactly what services will be available at that particular time. But I definitely wanted to make sure that I correct that mistake from earlier. So several other updates from this morning's briefing. I know that Shannon has sent along the aerial maps that we showed or tried to show here on the board, so you have received those. I also think that we had, and Shannon has corrected this as well, but the Pejebscott boat ramp, the proper name there was the Paper Mills Trail and Miller Park Boat Launch. The address was correct at 501 Lisbon Street. Pejebscott is a little bit further down the river, apparently, and we certainly like and appreciate everybody working with us to make sure that we had the proper location, the proper terminology for that. And other additional updates, the boat launch search of the river, the Androscoggin, they're still out there right now, and they'll be there as long as they can based on the light. And as we mentioned earlier, we're talking about sonars and grid searches and things of that nature. That's time intensive. It's taken them a while to work through there. They want to make sure they do it right. So we're not going to finish that search this evening. I would be surprised if you ever saw divers in the water overall. But tomorrow we'll have additional dive resources available to us from out of state, as well as some additional in-state teams. So again, we'll discuss that a little bit at 10 o'clock tomorrow, but no surprises. We expect that to go over, and that we'll have some assets there tomorrow. They did a bunch of flyovers this morning, as I mentioned. They did the sonar searches, some side, some ROV, and we'll be back on that tomorrow. The bar scene itself, they continue to do their on-scene investigation there, as well as at the bowling alley. They did check those wood lines. They may be back in there tomorrow as well, but that is progressing as expected. And I think another major piece of updates for you now is to talk about the shelter-in-place order and where that's going effective immediately. And I'm not a big reader of orders, but I think this is important that you hear this directly from a couple different sources. We're going to put out a release. There's going to be a cell phone geofence release to some folks. We've used that a couple times already during the active shooter as a warning and otherwise. But the shelter-in-place order is rescinded, except hunting is prohibited in the towns of Lewiston, Lisbon, Bowdoin, and Monmouth, beginning Saturday, 10/28/24, until further notice. The state police continue to search in Lewiston, Lisbon, Bowdoin, and Monmouth for the suspect, Robert Card, and recommend individuals remain vigilant. Businesses may choose to open or remain closed. Commissioner Camuso from IF&W is here to help us answer any additional questions about that hunting piece. It was asked this morning, and it was a good question, and I told you at that time that we were working on an answer for that. And what that means is that the general shelter-in-place has been rescinded. Specifically, hunting, again, is prohibited in those 4 towns, and those 4 towns only. And it's important that I mention that because the rest of the state is allowed to continue with their resident-only day on Saturday, tomorrow. And what does that mean? That means that there are going to be communities that hear gunshots from time to time because they're going to be hunting. So we would ask everybody to use caution in that and not think that every one of those gunshots is directly regarding this particular crisis situation, this investigation. So clearly, if they think, if they're suspicious, if they're concerned, they could certainly call their local agencies. But I would ask them to think about that, where they're located, when do they hear that? If they're 150 miles north, do they need to call their 911 center and create a response? And I think I would say no to that unless they have another set of facts, a fact pattern that would believe them that there's a direct connection between that gunfire and what they've heard to this point. So we had mentioned why we made that decision initially, because of the crisis and the situation that we had. Those 4 towns in particular, clearly with Lewiston, and the 2 tragic situations here, the 2 locations we've already talked about. And then you have Lisbon with the boat launch, Bowdoin where the suspect lived. In Monmouth, there's other family connections in that particular area as well. So this is not to say that the crisis is over, the emergency is done, we can go about our lives as life is good. We want our folks, we want our residents to remain vigilant and to pay attention to what we share for information. I again focus on what we share is in the Department of Public Safety in the city of Lewiston, because we continue to see a lot of information from a lot of different places that is far from accurate. I would also say in that regard, when we say that we're gonna meet you here at 10, we're gonna meet you here at 10. And when we say we're gonna notify you, we are gonna notify you in the afternoon if we're gonna get together and what time that is. I just encourage you to believe that until I prove you wrong, and I won't. And I say that because we've heard some other stuff. There's gonna be a press conference at 1 o'clock. And then our PIO, who's incredibly busy, gets 100 emails that says, is it gonna be 1 o'clock or is it gonna be this? And you've got a job to do, I get it. And we're trying to help you do your job. And if you could help us do our job, that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. So that is some of those pieces for updates from what we worked on this morning. A couple of additional things. Neighborhood canvases as an example, I did not speak to that. So we talked about large deployments of officers in various locations. What would that look like? Neighborhood canvases could be a couple of officers knocking on a door. And that's gonna be happening at various locations around this particular area in multiple towns. Again, if somebody's using their own common sense and they say that doesn't seem right, then sure, call. But you could have 2 uniformed officers or 2 officers with clearly displayed badges jumping out of a marked car to come talk to you as detectives. There was a question this morning around arrival times at the 2 locations, and we had done some research on that, which was hot off the presses walking out the door to come here today. So spare time, as we had mentioned earlier, that initial 911 call occurred at 6:56 p.m. And by the CAD system, or the computer-aided dispatch system, so somebody calls in on a radio and they says, now I'm out at that location. The first Lewiston officer arrived based on that system at 7 p.m., so 4 minutes later. The reality there, however, is that there were 4 plainclothes police officers that were shooting on the range in that general area. They hear that call come in, and they're walking into the bar, or rather the bowling alley, in about a minute and a half. So they don't have radios, they weren't in uniform, they hear it as they're at the range, they respond to the address immediately, and then they address the threat and clear the building. For that same location, right, spare time, as an example, you have Lewiston, it's a self-contained police department, they work with everybody, so it's not uncommon to see the Maine State Police in town, but they don't have specific areas to patrol. Calls came in to dispatch centers for the Department of Public Safety that would control the Maine State Police, as an example, at 6:57, so a minute-ish later, and we didn't have necessarily troopers right inside the town, so 11 minutes later, our first trooper arrives, which is not uncommon, actually, and that's a pretty good response time, considering it's an urban atmosphere and troopers aren't here. The second set of calls, as we've discussed, came in at 7:08, so this is the bar and grill. And the first Lewiston officer is responding there at 19:13 or 7:13 p.m., so 5 minutes later. And then really it becomes exponential after that, as an example. Should have mentioned this earlier, but spare time, a minute after those initial officers respond, 8 more are there. Now we're saying now everybody's starting to roll in at about the same time, and about 10 officers are responding to the bar and grill immediately thereafter. You got the first folks, and then people are just showing up from the police department and other locations. And that particular calls for service for the Maine State Police through Department of Public Safety dispatches, we got that second call at 7:10, about 2 minutes later than the Lewiston Center received it, and we had officers responding and arriving 3 minutes later. So why is that? They're already flying to the first address, and now we got a second call, and now they're diverting to that second call. So it's obviously they're in town, and they're running hard to that location. So those are the arrival times that I was asked about earlier today. I think based on the list that I made this morning, I think that's all we had for information. And I'll just call that kind of updates and follow-ups, things that I knew you were asking. There were some additional questions from the general public, which has been good for us to receive those through these, right? They get a chance to see stuff, and then they reach out and say, what does this mean? We had a bunch of people reach out about that shelter in place, and what does that mean, and what should I do, and what does that look like? And rather than answer those, through conversations with city staff, city leadership, police chiefs, we decided to rescind that order again, but recommend that people remain vigilant as they move forward. So I do appreciate them reaching out, and all of that contact has something to do with our ultimate decision. You know, where do we go from here? So with that in mind, that's the information that I was asked, and the information that I can update. We do have, I believe, the suspect picture up here as another piece. And the reason that we did this is because it's been quite some time. We've seen that photo, and you have a bunch of different photos. This, in fact, has more of the physical description of his height and weight, and his more official hair and eye color. You could guess at that based on some of the photos that you see, but why do that if we can directly give you that information? So if you could freshen up any material that you have there. It does, again, show that brown hooded sweatshirt and dark colored cargo pants that are in the photo that we had released earlier, which showed him walking in to spare time with that firearm. So I think that's the information that I wanted to get out to you today. I appreciate you coming back or holding on. I know you have long days and long nights, so that piece, you were gonna be around anyway, I'm sure. But I am, again, happy to try to take some questions and answers. The chief is here as well, but we did want to keep this tight from an operational standpoint. So, yes, sir.
Go back to the timeline.
Yeah.
4 officers who were at the range, I think, right? So can you just go over that again, just that sequence?
Yeah, sure. So officers are required to qualify a certain number of times a year, right? So in this particular instance, the officers are in plain clothes. They're shooting at a range right around the corner. The call comes in, they hear that, and they're going to respond, which just speaks to when these things happen, everybody's going. You could be a detective, the chief's bailing out of the station, you could be wherever, everybody goes. So being Lewiston officers, they go, we know where that is. Everybody gets in the car and they immediately go to spare time, to help in any way they can, not knowing that in fact they're gonna be the closest there and the first out. So that cuts almost 2.5 minutes off the original or the initial uniformed police officer's response. And that's not uncommon from a police standpoint. Sometimes you got months where you're thinking, boy, I'm right around the corner when all this stuff happens. And sometimes I'm on the other side of the city when other stuff happens. We're very, very lucky that the officers were that close, because I think you save lives with time responses. And in an urban atmosphere, depending on where everybody is and how busy the night is, that response could have been much longer than that. Yes, sir.
Have there been any credible sightings of the suspect by either law enforcement or the public since the shooting took place?
Yeah, so we have, again, 530 plus tips and leads that have come in. Some of those have been sightings, some of those have been, and I would say as simple as, but hey, I've got a vacant house that's in this location. I own a barn that I'm afraid to go to. There's something over here that concerns me. So those things run the gamut. And I'm also going to use that opportunity that the FBI supervisory agent in charge, Jody Cohen, who has been with us during these press conferences. We gave that digital video information out this morning. There's already well over 100 entries in that system. So that means you're putting that information out, and the general public is grabbing hold of that, wanting to be involved, and sending that information in. So I thank you for that, and we certainly thank the FBI for their assistance with that kind of material. So we've got all kinds of, somebody may say, somebody.
Has law enforcement seen him in the last 2 days? Or no?
We have not. Law enforcement has not seen him in the last 2 days. But again, in that stack of that 500 plus, you may have somebody that says, hey, we see somebody that looks like that. So we have not, but go ahead, ma'am.
Can you confirm that the note found at the suspect's home was a suicide note? And does that have something to do with lifting the shelter in place?
Yeah, I cannot, and I'm not going to speak to the note itself. I acknowledge the fact that a note existed this morning, but I'm not going to get into exactly what it contained. But, sir?
Sir, you said that the officers, the plainclothes officers who responded, addressed the threat and cleared the building. Can you explain what happened there?
Sure, when I say address the threat, they're going in the door, addressing an active shooter. So they're going in prepared to do whatever they need to do to make that scene safe. On that particular time, the suspect is no longer there. They're going in as if they were. So the first thing you do is you go in and clear that location, make sure it's safe, and then you start working with victims and triaging people and trying to make sure that you're getting additional units there as fast as possible. So, yes, sir.
I wonder if when the officers arrived at the second scene, the suspect was still there, or whether by the time the first responders had arrived, the suspects had already left. And secondly to that, outside of the area of Lewiston and the surrounding communities, can you talk about the work that's going on further afield? You know, the suspicion that we might have been able to flee a bit further than that, and potentially even outside of the state.
Yeah, sure. So the suspect was not at the second location when the officers arrived. As we discussed this morning, we showed those 3 maps as specific areas we knew we were definitely going to be working in, and then we've also cleared other areas that are farther afield. Somebody may again say, you know, there's a barn over there, there's an outbuilding over there, there's some family property that somebody's uncle owns, and can you check that? So as those things come in, some of those are kind of on the checklist to begin with, and then some come in real time. Because as those leads come in, we do look at those and then we farm them back out to either tactical units that are looking on that apprehension side or investigative units that can go out and do additional interviews. Well, at this point, you know, we are cognizant of all possibilities. We're not closing off anything because we want to make sure that we're being as comprehensive as we can with these particular searches. Yes, ma'am?
We noticed earlier there was extensive law enforcement presence in Durham, Maine. What can you tell us about what that was about?
In what town?
Durham, Maine.
Durham? Okay, yeah. So, and that's a situation where I heard that on the radio. Somebody had reached out to say that somebody may ask that question today. So we did look at that. There was a location there on a street in Durham where there were 2 911 hang-up calls. 911 hang-up calls happen on a regular basis. Depending on where they are, you may go, okay, wait a second. And then we had a second call. And then there was a sheriff's deputy that responded to the scene and then ultimately did not answer their radio, right? So you go 911 hang up, okay, wait a second, the officer that responded is not talking. That could be for a lot of different reasons. Again, based on the circumstances, we're certainly concerned about something like that. So officers did respond, made sure that he was safe, the scene was safe, and they moved on. So there was no direct connection to the suspect in this scenario, at least in today's call for service. Yes, sir.
Have you at this point secured or gone to all the residents, every place where he had lived previously? Have you gone to each one of those homes? And additionally, at this point, have you executed all available search warrants? Search warrants at the houses, at his car, social media, electronics. Like, have you put all of those search warrants in, or are there still others that need to be done?
There's still a lot of work to be done around the search warrant side of the house, just based on workload alone. I don't know, however, you know, have we searched every house that he's had over the last amount of time? Certainly the ones that most recent. There's a Bowdoin connection, which caused a bit of a stir last night. That was a location we were concerned about. You know, our reality from a homicide investigation, as an example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you may have done 1 or 2 search warrants. Based on electronic devices and everything else, you could do up to 30 search warrants on 1. So this kind of situation, clearly there's going to be a lot of affidavits, a lot of work to be done around that. So we're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office. Federal entities are assisting with these warrants. That's an all hands on deck. You just never know, I'm going to open this device and that's going to be the one, right? So we farmed that out to make sure we're making as much progress as possible. And I'm sorry for waiting. Go ahead.
By the end of this weekend, temperatures are supposed to plunge in the area. How is that going to complicate the search, or are you hoping that it actually might help investigators and be a problem for your suspect?
Yeah, so I think that goes in 2 different directions, right? We certainly have a lot of resources coming for the river tomorrow, because it would be nicer if it's sunnier, you can get a better look into the water. So that's one angle. If it's colder, there's an argument to be made that your thermo style of equipment, where you're looking for body temperatures or heat signatures, may work better in that scenario. So it does definitely vary. If it's cold for the suspect, it's certainly cold for our officers as well, and all those different things. We're certainly prepared and willing to do all those things, but that's where we're at. So yes, sir.
Discuss some of the reasoning behind why you removed the shelter-in-place orders in these 4 towns. Were you acknowledged, you're still actively searching? And secondly, do we know how many weapons Card had or has in his possession?
The second question is no, I don't know how many he has or had. If there are weapons within that residence, that'll be part of the search warrant and counting those things out. And the decision to release that or rescind that shelter-in-place order is something that we've discussed internally as command staff members at the CP and saying, okay, we're looking at pros and cons, right? We've got communities that are locked down, that are shut down. There are families and schools and pharmacies and all those things. So we knew going in and have acknowledged that repeatedly, that we know that that can have a negative impact on people. So the other side of that is we had very pointed threats early on reference to these locations and nothing specific since then. So you have to look at that and you have to do the math on that and say, so are we more comfortable? Are we doing more harm than good by keeping people away from these clinics and their doctors and in schools? And while this is still absolutely a dangerous situation without question, we've got to make recommendations and ask the people that we serve, ask the people that we protect to be vigilant, to pay attention, to listen to what we have to say. If you see something, say something. Because you know in most cases, you're like, I don't like that. That looks strange. We can feel that, especially when you live in neighborhoods, right? You live there, you're comfortable with that. That deal, that car is wrong coming down my driveway at this particular time of the day. What is going on? So that we don't come to those decisions to go into the order or come out lightly by any stretch of the imagination. But we do appreciate all the input from everybody about what does that mean and how it's impacted me as a person, right? So I appreciate that. Yes, sir?
Commissioner, is there any reason to believe that he may have obtained another vehicle since you already found his car, or may have gotten on a boat and gone down the river?
All possibilities are open to us. I don't have anything specific reference to that particular question. Next steps, where did he go after that and what was he in or not? Which is why we have feelers out in all directions. Is that a possibility? Sure. Is the river a possibility? Sure. We're going to continue to work those things until we're comfortable that those things have mitigated to the best of our ability, right? Because some of these locations we serve a search warrant on doesn't mean we're done, right? We may actually go back and continue a search and new information and go back and check a location again. So all of those things are absolutely available. Sir, right here?
Are there now 18 murder arrest warrants?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I know that the Attorney General's office told us this afternoon that they were trying to complete the rest of those warrants in a timely fashion. Now that those individuals had been identified and the families notified. I'll have that answer for you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for sure. And right here, ma'am, sorry.
Yes, I have two questions. The first is whether you can confirm that police found a gun in Card's car, the suspect's car, the one that was discarded. And secondly, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what communication has been like with law enforcement in on the border states like Canada, New Hampshire, even Massachusetts, and specifically whether or not there's any expectation or any plan to put like border checks in place as the suspect continues to potentially be moving.
Yeah, sure. So we won't speak to evidence, specific evidence. Did you find something here? Did you find something there? I completely understand why the question is valid, but it's not something we're prepared to talk about, certainly this early on in an investigation. I can tell you that I've been in contact with all of our border states or country. New Brunswick reached out to the governor. The commissioners from our border states reached out to me immediately the day of and have reached out to me multiple times since then. Again, a lot of their officers are with us at this point, right? New Hampshire is up here, Massachusetts is up here, you name it on the federal side of the house, they are here. So everybody's really working hard on that side of it. There's no expectation at all that there's gonna be some kind of a border checkpoint scenario, but I'm gonna take one more question here from you.
Question for the chief, if I could.
Oh, absolutely.
Chief, for members of law enforcement, especially from Lewiston, Auburn, and this close-knit community, can you talk about what it's been like to do this investigation when they may have close connections to some of the victims?
It's been very difficult, I can tell you that for certain. Seeing these pictures come up on the board, I know a couple of them myself. There are many law enforcement officials that I know some of these victims, and it's certainly very challenging. Try to go into a situation very objectively and, do a very thorough job knowing that you know this person that it's affected, or, a family member or a friend. Very difficult. I can tell you that all of the police officers I know from the area remain very professional at all times, and we press on and we get the job done.
Chief, just quickly, if you could provide perspective processing those scenes, those two scenes where the shootings took place, some of the complexities, are you dealing with 50, showcasing hundreds? What are just some of the complexities that you all are facing?
Yeah, again, the state police has the lead on this investigation. I can't comment on that. I can tell you that in scenes that I've investigated personally or that I've been to, it happens a lot. It takes a long time to process these scenes. It's nothing that happens in a quick manner like Mike mentioned earlier this morning. It doesn't happen in an hour and the case is solved. These things take time.
Commissioner, is the vote still missing?
I'm not prepared to answer that question, but I do appreciate that. And as I mentioned, thank you very much for being here. We really do appreciate that. And we'll continue to strengthen this partnership and get out as much information as we can. So have a nice evening. Thank you. 10 o'clock tomorrow. And it will be here unless we change the venue.